Now this animation path that has appeared between the two keys in the perspective viewport actually is a very useful testing tool. If we open the Matinee editor and we disable the full screen so that we can see both the perspective viewport on one side and the Matinee editor on the other side, and if we click on the timeline cursor and drag it between the two keys, we can actually see the perspective viewport update in real time. This process is a testing process. It's called scrubbing. Now that we've essentially set the animation up in the timeline, go to this left section where the track is listed, and you will see to the right of it two squares. One is green and the other is black. Now if you select the black one, it'll turn yellow. What you've essentially done is turned on the curve editor, which lies right above the timeline. The curve editor displays graphical information of the animation. Now at this point, the curve editor does not seem to be displaying a lot of information. This is because the curve editor is actually zoomed in right now. So head over to the curve editor toolbar, select Fit View to All, and we will zoom out the curve editor. Another problem we can see is that there's multiple graphs present. This is because the curve editor displays a graph for each animation path on each axis. So if we head over to our interfactor in the perspective viewport, you can see it only follows along the x-axis. So if we go back to the curve editor, we can remove the y and the z axes. So at this point we're only looking at the x-axis graph, which is the only relevant graph for this animation. Let's take the time to look at the layout of the curve editor now that we're looking at the relevant graph. On the x-axis, you can see the time, which is directly correlated to the timeline. On the y-axis are property values. These squares signify key points. And the line between the square, which is essentially the actual graph, this line is called an interpolation curve, and it depicts changes between keys. So now that we can see the curve, the next step is to edit the interpolation curve. Now there's two ways to do that. The first way is to let the computer handle the curve, and we do that by going up to the curve editor toolbar, and you can see there's various options here. I can hit auto, and I can make it look like that, or linear, or even constant. But if I want to edit the curve manually, I can go to curve user, and you'll see at each key, if I zoom in, a white line will appear. And the white line essentially runs tangent to the key. These are called tangent handles, and you can use them essentially to click and drag and change the angle which the interpolation curve travels near the key. So by zooming out again, I can click on each key and essentially change the curve. And that's how you edit the interpolation curves. One last note about interpolation curves. You may be wondering, what's the point of editing the interpolation curve? Well, if you remember, I stated earlier that the y-axis of the curve editor represents property values. Therefore, when the interpolation curve goes negative to that axis, as you can see here, that means that the animation will portray a negative property value. So if we look to our perspective viewport, you see our barrel, which is undergoing a movement animation. So watch what the negative interpolation curve does to this animation pad. As you can see, the negative effect on the location property of the interp actor forces the barrel backwards before it goes forward. And that's the effect that a negative interpolation curve has on the movement track, or the movement animation. So here we are. The animation is completed. The final step is to set activation triggers in Kismet. Now to do so, we can add a sequence object. Right-click in the gray space, go to Event, and Level Load. Now link the new sequence object to the Matinee sequence object. Now one last thing. As stated earlier, if we select the Matinee sequence object, its properties appear in the bottom left corner of Kismet. I'm going to select Loopin to loop the animation. Now we're ready to test the level. Now let's test our animation in the Unreal Editor. Minimize Kismet, and then select Play this level in a level editor. So as you can see, the animation is moving along the animation path. You can also see that it moves forward, then backwards, then forward, due to the interpolation curve shape. Now hopefully this video clarifies the uses of Matinee, as well as the processes and user interfaces. Again, my name is Devon Singh, and I'm a level designer at the Guildhall at SMU. Thank you for watching.